The story of the Universalist decline is a difficult one, and there was a lot of self-blame and Monday morning quarterbacking over why this happened, but there were some real basic reasons. Some of them were economic. There was not a lot of money given by Universalists in order to maintain churches. Sometimes the churches would be planted in a haphazard fashion, and so you'd have a whole string of churches that would run along a railroad line, for instance. Because there wasn't a lot of money, there wasn't a lot of money to pay ministers. So one minister might serve several churches in a string. And then the railroad line would close. And then the towns that were associated with these churches would begin to collapse. Ministers couldn't get to them, and slowly you have entire swathes of churches in the Midwest just collapsing. Right before, but certainly by the time of the Great Depression, church closures became very common. The other thing, and this is a little bit sort of a counter narrative to the self-blame, was that the Universalists were too successful. That the sort of the gut-wrenching fear of damnation, the fear of death, particularly during the Victorian era, this consuming worry that our eternal fate was tied to the decisions we made in our own lifetimes, didn't really hold a lot of water anymore. And so that it was possible to feel like a Universalist, but not necessarily go to a Universalist church, which also sometimes was a necessity because there might not be one near where you lived. So it was hard to maintain those universalism for Universalists in a Universalist church continuum. So a combination of little money, very few ministers, poor church planting practices, social changes, led to a diminution of the Universalists as a whole. And there's one more thing besides. The Universalists were terrible about overestimating their own numbers. There was a widely circulated statistic, a false statistic, that the Universalists were the 5th largest denomination in the country or something like that. But I've never seen the numbers in the registers that would make that claim legitimate. And where I think the claim came from was newspaper readership. Newspapers and journals were an important way for 19th and 20th century Universalists to keep the community together. You might be the only Universalist in your town, and perhaps even your spouse would be opposed to it. This happened quite commonly. Or Universalism might run in families from generation to generation, but there'd be no other Universalists around. It was through newspapers. And Universalists were amazing publishers, that you were able to keep those connections together, that you were able to hear the news, that you were able to make reasoned arguments in defense of the faith, that you were able to get sermons, that you were able to get some sort of connection. But the problem is people took a lot of newspapers. So I think double, triple, quadruple counting was possible. People would sign up for newspapers for other people. So I think it's the newspaper subscription numbers which led falsely to the claims that Universalism was so big. And then when you had good numbers about who were actually in churches, that it really looked like a collapse. So it's a combination of bad statistics on the front end and economic decline on the other really made Universalism look very small.